The drone hummed over the vineyard, a dark insect against a white sky. Sunlight skipped off of rows of glass like fish in a river. Champagne flutes, lantern globes, the glossy face of a phone. Everywhere reflections. I tasted metal when I swallowed. The bubbles felt sharp. At the Whitmore estate, everything had the soft sheen of magazine paper. White tents breathing in the heat. A string quartet sawed a bright, expensive sound. The vines below us were green cords pulled taut across the valley. St. Helena shimmered at 90 degrees. Sunscreen and cut grass floated in the air. My daughter stood under a trellis threaded with garden roses. Mara's dress was a clean fall of silk. Her fingers shook once and stilled. Asher Whitmore held both of her hands and smiled at her the way men smile in commercials. He had the face for it. He also had his phone palmed behind the bouquet, his thumb checking again. The screen flashed on his cuff like a fish belly in sun. I tried to focus. The officiant spoke in the language of forever. My sister Tessa dabbed her eyes and squeezed my elbow. The quartet found a sweet, syrupy chord. Leonard Whitmore moved through the guests like he owned the breeze. People leaned toward him without meaning to. A waiter came within radius and flinched. Leonard smiled teeth, even then lost it as soon as the man turned. Celeste Whitmore sat in the shade of a lace parasol. Her posture was a lesson. Every 45 minutes by my watch, her pearl bracelet buzzed against the thin skin of her wrist. She took a small pill with a sip of champagne and smiled at nothing. The smile never reached her eyes. The eyes did not reach Mara at all. Mom. Mara was looking at me across the aisle, just a flick of daughter's radar catching a cloud passing over. I lifted my glass and smiled back. It was the wrong taste again, aspirin and nickel. I set the glass down. Asher lifted his chin toward the officiant, toward the line he was waiting for. The phones rose like a flock settling on power lines. I watched a reflection of Mara in the distance, flattened on a silver platter. The platter tilted, and she ran downhill, her face trailing light. My chest tightened. I'm going to the restroom, I told Tessa. Back in 2. The wine cave breathed cold into my face like a refrigerator door. Stone walls, a damp chill that held the day at a distance. Barrels slept in long ranks. The floor pebbles shifted under my heels. I pressed my palms to my cheeks. My reflection in the sink's curved steel was a stretched stranger. Voices came through the cave as if traveling along a wire. I followed the sound without thinking. A door half open, a cool office that smelled like dust and money. I stepped into the shadow beside a rack of old vintages. The J17 batch is contained for now, a man said. Clear, neither angry nor worried, used to being obeyed. Leonard. The name was a taste too. A second man lower. Regulatory filing is Tuesday. We need a body on quality. Once this wedding is done, Leonard said we install Director of Quality Systems. Paperwork is ready. We backdate to before the flag. When the FDA turns the light on, her signature is everywhere. Silence snapped inside my chest. She has no pharmaceutical background, the second man said. She'll read what we hand her. That is perfect, Leonard replied. Negligence, not intent. If it breaks that way, the sentence is shorter. Sentence. The word struck the stone and came back. I must have shifted. A bottle tapped the wood. The voices stopped. I held my breath so hard my ribs hurt. Footsteps crossed the rug. The door widened. I moved before I saw a face. Out into the cave past the sleeping barrels to the echo of my own feet. Cold, thin air, then the hard slap of heat again when I stepped outside. My phone buzzed as if it knew I needed it. Unknown number. The text was clean and sharp. This is Camille Hart, former VP Regulatory at Whitmore Therapeutics. We met at rehearsal dinner. Your daughter is in danger. They are installing her as a fall person for J17. I have audit trails and audio. Meet me at the Olive Gazebo now. I remembered Camille. Short hair, pale scarf in the wrong season. She had stood at the back of the tent and not eaten anything. I walked toward the ceremony like a person waking from a wave. My shoes stuck a little to the matting. The quartet was still playing. The officiant was still talking. Leonard stood in profile, a coin black against white. Asher's phone lit his cuff. Celeste lifted her glass. Her bracelet buzzed. I looked at Mara. She was ablaze and a person at once. My throat was dry. I stepped into the aisle. I'm faint, I said, loud enough to carry with a small wobble for the theater of it. Honey, help me. 300 faces turned, then softened a notch for the older woman. Mara hesitated, eyes on Asher. He squeezed her hand, still smiling. There was a seam at his jaw. "Go on," he murmured. "We can pause." "We cannot," I said under my breath when Mara reached me. My hand found her forearm, warm skin a tremor. "We are leaving now." "What is wrong?" she asked without moving her mouth. "Walk." Tessa was there like I knew she would be, stepping between us and a woman with a hat the size of a satellite dish. "Minute," Tessa said friendly, and handed the hat woman a napkin. The woman had a drop of red wine on the lace. She dabbed. A red mouth opened wider on white. The stain grew from the center. We moved under the edge of the tent. The heat hit like a shoulder. The ground dropped and the path turned to pea gravel that hissed under our shoes. The olive trees threw small coins of shade. Bees stitched the air. My pulse was in my ears. "Mom, talk to me," Mara said. "I cannot. Not right here." "Gazebo 50 yards. I pointed. The little white structure sat between 2 rows of trees. It was framed by pale dirt and gray leaves. It looked like a set. "Is it me?" Mara said, and then did not finish the sentence. She already knew the answer and was testing her own voice. We walked faster. The slope laid our weight forward. My hand trembled on her arm and I willed it to stop. Sweat ran down my back in cool threads. "Where are you taking her?" A voice behind us, the shape of control wrapped in courtesy. We did not look back. Tessa said something in a bright tone that meant nothing and held everything up for one beat. It was enough. The gazebo smelled like sap and old paint. A fan turned somewhere. Camille stood in the corner, a leather case hugged to her ribs. The scarf was gone. Her hair looked like it had been cut by a practical person. "Dr. Kane," she said. "Mara." Mara's name in a stranger's mouth made my stomach clench. I reached past it. "What do you have?" I asked. Camille opened the case like a small door. Inside were papers with clips and a flash drive and a hospital bracelet bag. Her hands were steady. Mine were not. "Audit logs from Fremont," she said. "Valvexer J17. Electronic signatures edited. Timestamps rolled. A recorded call between Leonard and Asher from 3 days ago. They need you in quality on paper, Mara. They need the wedding for spousal privilege. Their lawyer is clever." Mara made a small sound, not a word. She put both hands on the gazebo rail and looked down at her shoes. A bee landed on the hem of her dress, tiny legs touching silk, then lifted away. "They will say I am bitter," Camille said. "They paid me to go quietly 5 years ago. I did not go quietly enough. There is more on this drive. It will be enough to begin." "Why me?" Mara said, still looking at her shoes, voice flat. "I do not even know what quality systems is." "Because you do not," Camille said. "Because you want to be useful. Because you trust people who smile when they speak to you. Because you believe in merit." A sound moved through the trees like a crowd taking one breath. The quartet had stopped. Without the music, the estate was too still. "We go back," I said. "We go to the front where everyone can see us." Mara lifted her face. Something had already changed there. Asher had told her she had a light that made rooms feel warmer. She could hide that light. She could aim it. I watched her aim it now. She wiped her palms on her dress. Her fingers left no mark. The fabric was too well made to hold prints. She nodded once at Camille. Camille slid the drive into my hand and closed my fingers around it like she was giving me a pulse. We stepped out of the shade. The sun was the same, but the day was not. The tent was a white boat in a green sea. People under it shifted, searching for a story they could agree on. We came up the path and the air cooled a fraction as if the crowd created weather. I saw Asher at the aisle's top, hands in a pocket, now the smile sewn back on. Leonard stood 2 paces behind him, tilted to watch both his son and the space around him. Celeste's bracelet buzzed. She raised her glass and sipped. I felt the drone before I heard it. The shadow crossed the grass and the hem of Mara's dress. It passed over the toe of my shoe and made the leather look like oil. The drone climbed, then hovered. Leonard's eyes found us. He did not blink. He lifted 2 fingers. A guard near the catering station shifted his weight, then took a step. The second guard took another, angling to the olive path we had just walked. Celeste's pearl bracelet lit. She touched it and smiled at me without warmth. The path behind us narrowed. The gravel hissed. The air went very quiet. The 2 guards closed the gap between the trees. Gravel locked under their shoes. One lifted a hand, polite and final. "Mr. Whitmore asks that you wait," he said. His tone had the shape of a request and the weight of a command. "The bride is returning to her ceremony," I said. "Unless you want to make a scene by detaining her at her own wedding." Camille raised her phone so the sun hit the lens. "I am recording for everyone's safety." The guard's eyes flicked to the glass of the screen, then to the tent where 300 guests had their own screens ready. He stepped back a half pace. The second one stayed where he was not quite brave enough to move, not brave enough to hold the line alone. We walked past them into heat that smelled like lemon in the grass. The quartet had fallen silent. The officiant stood small under the canopy, his folder clutched to his chest like a raft. Asher saw us and cupped his hands. "Hey," he called, warm and relieved a man who was about to solve a minor problem with charm. "Everything okay?" Mara took a breath and kept walking. Her face was empty of theater. She reached the aisle and stopped on the white runner. The runner had a faint dusting of footprints. Her own shoes had left none. She lifted her hand toward the microphone. "May I?" she said. The officiant hesitated, then handed it over the way people hand over heavy things to someone who looks steady. The mic popped once. The tent hushed to nothing. A bee worked somewhere among the roses. "Thank you for being here," Mara said. Her voice was clear. "There will be no wedding today." The sound that moved through the guests was not one sound. It was breath and linen and a glass set down too hard. Somewhere a camera shutter began to click and did not stop. Asher stepped forward with his palms open. "Sweetheart, you are upset. We can step aside and talk like adults." Mara kept the mic close. "I am talking now." Leonard moved to stand a fraction behind his son, angled, so he could watch the crowd. His smile was friendly and thin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this unfortunate pause. Please proceed to the reception while we attend to a private matter." "Private," I said, and tasted the wrong metal again. "Interesting word." Camille reached into her case and held up a printed email. The paper made a soft snap. She did not wave it. She simply let people see that it existed. "I am Camille Hart," she said. "Former VP of Regulatory Affairs at Whitmore Therapeutics. I have audit logs and recorded calls. There is evidence of a plan to install Mara as Director of Quality Systems on paper so that her signature appears on approvals for Valvexor J17. A murmur took a step closer. The drone angled down so its shadow cut through the aisle and over Asher's shoes. He looked up at it, and then back to the crowd and smiled with more teeth. "That is a disgruntled ex-employee," he said. "We can clear this up tomorrow when everyone has slept and eaten." "Play it," Mara said. Camille touched her phone. The small speaker gave a thin shape to the first few words. Leonard's voice was unmistakable. The cadence was the same as the one under the tent. "Once the wedding is done, we install Director of Quality Systems. Paperwork is ready. We backdate to before the flag." Someone in the back said "oh" in a way that was not loud at all and yet reached the front, like a thread. Asher's smile cooled. "That could be anything," he said. "We discuss strategy all the time. Context matters." Mara turned her head a little. "Dad," she said, and then did not say the word she had used all week for Leonard. She swallowed it and let it fall somewhere she could not see. "Mr. Whitmore, did you say negligence is shorter than intent?" Leonard's mouth made a parenthesis. "In complex businesses, legal exposure is an abstraction that needs managing. Words like negligence and intent are not moral judgments. They are categories that lawyers use." Mara looked at him and did not blink. Celeste stood up with care. She lifted her parasol by its handle and set it aside on the seat. She reached for her pearl bracelet and touched the pearl that was also a button. The tiny vibration moved under the skin of her wrist. She picked up her champagne and held it like a prop she was reading from. "Please," she said softly, not to anyone in particular. The guards tried again at the back of the tent, two shadows moving toward the front. Phones lifted. People pivoted without standing. The officiant added himself to the blockade without meaning to by simply not stepping aside. Tessa appeared near the cake and began speaking to a table of men who turned out to be reporters. She used her hands a lot. They looked where she pointed. They lifted their cameras higher. "Agent Park," Camille said into her phone. Her voice was even. "We are at the Whitmore estate in St. Helena. We have audio and live witness statements. The situation is public." Leonard turned his head and breathed in through his teeth, and then smoothed it over so fast it was like it had not happened. He reached for the microphone and I placed my hand on the stand. The silver was warm from the sun. "This is slander," he said to the space above the crowd where reputations live. "We will address it in the proper venue." "That will be the right place," I said. Asher took one more step until he was a half stride from Mara. He lowered his voice so the mic would not catch it, but my ears did. "Baby, you and I did this together. You know me. I love you." Mara moved back without looking at him. Her heel brushed the runner and made a sound like a small sigh. She brought the mic up to the level of her collarbone. "You told your father I was perfect for your purposes," she said. "Your email used those words." Asher pressed his lips together. His eyes went to the crowd, then to Leonard, then back to Mara's face. He looked like a person adjusting to a room that is brighter than it should be. A guest near the front, a woman in navy with a press badge half hidden by a scarf, raised her voice. "Can you repeat the phrase about spousal privilege?" Camille tapped to the relevant clip. Walter's voice did not exist in this story. Leonard's did. "The marriage creates a stronger legal shield," his recorded voice said. "Spousal privilege. She cannot be compelled to testify against you. If it breaks that way, the sentence is shorter." The quiet that followed was like a field after harvest. No cover, no shade. Celeste touched her bracelet. The pearl did not light this time. Her hand drifted down to the purse in her lap and then off it. She folded both hands together and set them on her knees. The parasol lay beside her like a fallen flower. Leonard looked at security and gave a small nod. The guard shifted again. The first one found the aisle blocked by Tessa and two men in suits, who were not security, but looked as if they used to be. The second one stopped at the sight of 3 cameras pointed at his face. The officiant found his professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. He chose his words with care. "The ceremony cannot continue at this time. Please return to your cars." Asher turned back to Mara. "We can fix this," he said, and his voice broke on the second word. His hand lifted toward her palm up. The hand waited there. Mara looked at his hand and then at the little table that held the bouquet and the ring box and a glass of water with a slice of lime in it. The lime had a seed. The seed had slid to the bottom and pressed against the glass. She removed her engagement ring with her left hand. The diamond looked colder in the afternoon light than it had in the morning. She placed it on the linen beside the bouquet. The linen accepted it without a wrinkle. She picked up the glass of water and drank half of it and put it back with more care than it needed. Asher's hand fell. A scatter of movement rippled through the crowd. Some stood. Some made calls. Some watched through their screens as if that would insert a layer of air between their faces and the day. Leonard spoke quietly just for his son. "Call Stevens, lock down the plant, lock down personnel." Camille heard it and pressed send on a message she had drafted and kept ready in her outbox. Her thumb did not shake. Her jaw did. Tessa stepped to Mara's shoulder. "Car is coming," she said, eyes on the parking loop below the vines. Celeste looked at Mara for the first time and held the look. It was not a request and not an apology. It was a recognition and then it was gone. She lifted the parasol with both hands and set it upright again, so it made a circle of shade at her feet. A radio cracked on a guard's belt. A short burst. 2 words. The tent fabric lifted and fell as a hot breeze moved through it. On the hillside beyond the vines, a thread of sound pulled thin from the road. It rose once, and then settled over the afternoon like a fine line of blue. The siren thinned across the hillside and then sank into the heat. Guests peeled away toward the parking loop, talking into phones, touching arms, looking over shoulders. The guards held their positions until the camera swung, and then looked at Leonard. He did not nod. He looked through them. That was enough to make them stand still. Tessa pulled up in a rented sedan that smelled like new plastic and citrus wipes. The back door stuck on the first pull. Camille lifted the handle again, and it gave with a skitter. Silk rasped as Mara folded herself into the seat. The bouquet slid off her lap and left a petal on the mat that looked like a red mouth. I climbed in and shut the door, and the sound of the estate flattened behind the glass. Tessa drove one-handed. Her knuckles were pale. She watched the mirrors the way nurses watch monitors. We moved down the long drive under oaks and flags. A drone kept pace beside us across the vineyard, and then rose like a bird that remembered it was supposed to be somewhere else. At the gate, a guard lifted a clipboard, saw the cameras behind us, and waved us through without a word. In open sun, the smell of cut grass gave way to hot asphalt. The car's air conditioner pushed out air that tasted like metal and paper. Mara took off her veil and set it on the seat like a small cloud. She pressed her palms against her thighs to stop the shaking, and then pressed harder when it did not stop. We cut from the valley toward the interstate, past a billboard for a tasting room that showed a glass tilted, and the world inside it turned upside down. The image caught at the corner of my eye and pulled there. The sky looked like a reflection, not the thing itself. The motel sat back from the service road with a buzzing sign and a rectangle of water the color of a coin. The lobby had a ficus tree and a bowl of hard candy that smelled like cherry cough syrup. The clerk looked at Mara in the dress, looked at the rest of us, and pretended he saw a bridal party that had run late. He slid 2 keys across the counter with the discretion of a priest. In the room, the air was cold and damp. The unit rattled and ticked. Light bled around the blackout curtains. The mirror over the dresser was spotted. Mara stood in front of it and touched the corner of her mouth as if that would tell her what her face meant. She went into the bathroom, and I heard water and the soft thump of a cabinet closing and the quiet choke of someone trying not to make a sound. When she came out, her eyes were swollen and clear. She had scrubbed her cheeks until the skin flushed. A smear of red from the reception napkin had bled into the silk near her hip. The stain had found the weave and held there. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. The voice was calm and practical. Dr. Kane. Agent Karen Park, FDA Office of Criminal Investigations. We have received materials from Miss Hart in the past, and records of your public event this afternoon speak for themselves. Do not sign anything. Do not meet any Whitmore representative. A legal counsel from the Department of Justice will contact you within the hour. Are you safe? Yes, I said. We are at a motel off the interstate. I have the drive. Good. We will pick it up. We will need chain of custody. I will text from a secure number. She hung up without filler. The text arrived while the call screen was still fading. A map pin, a time, a name, Ausa Malik Perez. Camille sat at the small table by the window and opened her case. She laid out the papers without theatrics. She pointed at the audit trail printout. The top line showed a green check and a timestamp that had been rolled back 2 hours from a server that should not have allowed it. She tapped the margin. Same pattern in the 3 preceding lots, J14, J15, J16. But J17 is where the contamination lands. Black specks under light, aspergillus. The lab flagged it. Someone overrode the hold. Mara pressed 2 fingers to the silk where the stain was. She lifted them and looked at the faint red. She did not try to scrub it out. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor where a shadow from the curtain hem cut across the carpet like a ruler. The television across from us ran a loop with our faces blurred by glare. A banner marched along the bottom. Napa bride halts Whitmore wedding. A spokesperson in a neat suit delivered a statement in even tones that did not quite match the tightness around the eyes. My clients categorically deny these baseless allegations that originated with a disgruntled former employee and an understandably emotional bride. We will address this in the proper venue. Camille breathed out through her nose. They center me as unstable. They center her as hysterical. They attack and reverse. They have a book for this. Mara did not look up. Love used a word like privilege. Tessa switched off the television. The room was louder without it because the air unit ticked and the freeway hummed and the neon buzzed. I moved to the desk and opened my laptop. The screen came up with a photo of a lake surface marred by a single drop. One circle moving outward then another. I opened a clean document. We describe what happened, I said, more to the air than to anyone. We name the tactics, we cite the studies, we make it readable, we do not accuse, we analyze. Camille glanced at me and nodded once. She turned the audit trail so that the margins were straight. She slid across a list of references she had written in a tidy hand on yellow paper. The handwriting was steady and small, the ink black and even. The text from Perez arrived while the cursor blinked on a blank page. He asked for a call. His voice had a heavy weariness and a careful edge. Professor, we will move quickly. We need your cooperation, and we need to control what enters the public sphere. If you put anything into print, we must vet it for sensitive details. Do not identify the plant. Do not print dates. Do not include audio transcripts. Speak to patterns, not names. We can do that, I said. We can write the frame, not the pictures. Camille emailed a set of files to a secure address he provided. She logged it by hand on her yellow pad, then had me sign and date the line. Park texted to say she would meet us in the morning for physical transfer. The clock on the nightstand rolled from 1 minute to another with a mechanical click that sounded louder than it should. We worked into the night. Coffee from the lobby had a burnt sweetness. The scanner on the motel business center made a high beep every time a page fed. Mara changed into a t-shirt and tied her hair back with a ribbon from the bouquet. She read aloud from a monograph on workplace gaslighting, stumbled on the academic noun, and read it again with too much care. She wrote 3 sentences about praise that had felt like placement. She crossed out 2 and kept the one that landed without noise. By dawn, the draft smelled like ink and fatigue. We sent it to Perez. He called within 20 minutes, slower, now satisfied, in the way of a person who holds the lid down on a box while he tapes it shut. This will not hurt our case if you strip the identifiers, he said. You have done that. Keep it that way. I will flag it for our liaison. The motel curtains leaked pale gold. The pool below had turned the color of the sky and still looked like a coin. Tessa knocked on the adjoining door with a knuckle. She had found a machine in the lobby that made pancakes in tired circles. She handed us paper plates. Mara ate without speaking, then rinsed her hands in the bathroom sink and studied them as if they belonged to someone who did better, cleaner work. An email notification slid onto my screen. The subject line carried the name of a journal that bridged psychology and law. The letter inside was short and formal. It referenced an expedited review for an early online release given public interest. It requested a final round of light edits and a statement of author contributions. It did not congratulate us. It moved. My inbox blinked again, an anonymous address. No name, no subject beyond a single letter. C. The message was 2 sentences. The first said that every 45 minutes she took what was placed in her palm and swallowed it and smiled because that was what was expected. The second said that hearing the word privilege in that recording was like hearing a door closing that had looked like a window for a very long time. Mara read it once and then sat back with her eyes closed. The air unit clicked. My shoulders relaxed in a way I did not register until they did. Agent Park came mid-morning in a jacket that did not announce itself. She took the drive in a small evidence pouch and made us sign 3 lines that felt like crossing a stream on stones. She nodded at Camille and shook her hand like 2 professionals who had finally seen each other in daylight. She left as quietly as she had arrived. The television in the lobby was back on. A feed showed the outside of a facility in Fremont. The words breaking and raid and federal appeared in the crawl under the pictures. Employees stood on the sidewalk staring at their own building. The camera caught a pallet of crates in the loading bay. A small dot on one label looked darker than the rest, like a flaw in a tooth. At noon, the front desk called. There was certified mail for Dr. Kane and Ms. Kane. The envelope was heavy. The clerk slid it under our door. The paper had a courthouse seal and the breathless tone of a document that will travel whether you hold it still or not. I felt the weight of it in my hands. I set it on the bed and smoothed the corner. Outside the window, a drone held steady over the motel sign. Its body was dark and glossy. The reflection of its rotors flickered on the glass of the television circle, spinning inside other circles. The air unit ticked in time. The certified envelopes led to a room with seal green carpet and air that smelled like old paper and polished wood. The Philip Burton Federal Building held the morning in its marble ribs. Elevators opened and closed with the hush of held breath. A marshal pointed us to a bench. Agent Park sat 3 rows back, her file closed, her attention steady. AUS Malik Perez spoke briefly with a clerk, then tipped his chin at us as if to say it is time. Inside the courtroom, the temperature fell by a degree that felt like a rule. A wall of screens waited behind counsel tables. The defense side wore expensive navy. The government side had the practical black of people who have carried boxes upstairs. The judge entered and brought every whisper to ground with a single look. Mara took the oath with her palm open and her voice clear. The microphone made a small pop. Perez stood a careful distance away and began with short questions that made space for short answers. The jury watched the way people watch waves that may or may not turn into a storm. State your name. Mara Kane. Describe your relationship with Asher Whitmore. We met at a charity launch. We dated for 10 months. We were engaged for 5. When did you first learn of plans to install you as Director of Quality Systems? The day of the wedding, in a gazebo under olive trees at the Whitmore estate. A former regulatory executive handed me audit trails and a recorded call. Perez stepped a little to the left so the screens did not block the jury. What did the recorded call contain? Mr. Whitmore. Discussing backdating paperwork so that my signature would appear on approvals for Valvexor J17. Perez turned to the screen. The first exhibit loaded. An email thread filled the white. The projector washed the wood with a faint glow. The line with Asher's name sat in the center of it all. She is perfect for our purposes. No pharmaceutical background means negligence, not intent. Someone in the jury box took a breath in and did not let it out right away. Perez advanced to the audit trail. Rows of timestamps fields corrected approval shifted. A red box framed a rollback on the night J17 moved forward. A pointer glided across the columns without hurry. The room heard the soft click of the space bar. Then another. The black fleck on a lab capture image appeared, a dot in a clear liquid like a moth on a window. The lights made the dot brighter than it should have been. Perez loaded the audio. Leonard's voice arrived in the room like a thing people had already met and did not want to meet again. We backdate to before the flag. The marriage creates a stronger legal shield, spousal privilege. If it breaks that way, the sentence is shorter. No one coughed. The air conditioner hummed. The second hand on the courtroom clock clicked on the minute and then sat very still. Perez returned to Mara. He did not move for effect. When did it click for you? He asked. She looked at the screen, then at her hands. Her fingers were interlaced and white at the knuckles. When love started to sound like risk management. Did you agree to accept the position? No. Did you sign any paperwork related to quality systems at Whitmore Therapeutics? No. He nodded. No further questions. Leonard's lead counsel rose. She had a face that could cut ribbon without scissors. She approached the stand with a measured patience and set her hands on the lectern as if it were an altar. Miss Kane, you were left at the altar, so to speak, she said. You made a dramatic announcement at a wedding. People record things when they are emotional. People say things. You are not a scientist. You are a marketing professional. Is it possible you misinterpreted complex corporate language as sinister? Mara kept her gaze steady. The language I heard was clear. The documents are clearer. You are still upset. That is understandable. Mara lifted a shoulder a fraction. I am interested in facts. The counsel thinned her mouth. You wrote a paper soon after, did you not? A paper that attempted to frame your personal experience as a case study. That is convenient. It is a study of tactics, Mara said. It does not name Whitmore. It does not name dates. It names patterns. The documents name Whitmore. You were eager to join the family business. I was eager to be useful, she said, not to be used. A low murmur moved across the gallery and then settled. The counsel tried another angle. You loved Mr. Whitmore. I love the person I thought he was, Mara said. The emails show the person he is. Objection, the defense second said, as if to say this was narration. The judge overruled without comment. The counsel looked at her notes and seemed to realize they had run out of polite blades to throw. No further questions, she said, and sat down with movements that did not waste grace. Asher's attorney stood, then shook his head and sat again. The single act was a sentence without a verb. Father and son did not look at each other. The space between them felt lit. Perez called Celeste to the stand. She walked as if each step had been measured against a metronome for years and had only just become her own. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore, and sat. Mrs. Whitmore Perez said, How long have you been married to Mr. Leonard Whitmore? 39 years. Describe your routine on the day of your son's wedding. She sat with her knees together and her hands folded lightly and looked at the jury with eyes that did not yet know who they were when they were not performing. I woke at 5. I took a prescribed pill with water. I had a schedule. I maintained posture. I smiled. How often did you take the pill? Every 45 minutes. Did you know why? No. Did Mr. Whitmore provide the schedule? Yes. She paused and then took her pearl bracelet in her left hand. The pearl in the center had a tiny seam where the timer hid. She unfastened the clasp and set the bracelet on the witness ledge beside the microphone. as if she were setting down a small creature that had been asleep in her palm. The act made a sound like a note tapped on glass. "I stopped," she said. Perez gave her the space of one breath. "Did you hear the term spousal privilege spoken by Mr. Whitmore prior to the wedding?" "Yes." "In what context?" "In the context of preventing a wife from testifying against a husband." "Did you understand that Miss Kane's marriage to your son was intended to create that privilege?" "Yes." The room made a shape around the word yes that held and did not break. Celeste looked at Mara as if the air was new and held there 1 second longer than you would call polite. Then she folded her hands again and rested them on the wood. The pearl bracelet lay on the ledge like a tiny crown without a head. "No further questions," Perez said. The judge allowed a short recess. Leonard spoke to his attorneys in level tones, and then with a clip of anger he could not hide fast enough told them they were finished. He demanded new counsel on the record. The judge told him this was not the time for theater. Closing arguments moved with the gravity of late afternoon. Perez did not strain for drama. He returned to the black speck in the vial and the rolled timestamps and the voice on the recording. He spoke as if he had all the time in the world and no time to waste. Leonard's replacement counsel excused greed as complexity and called negligence an ugly word the law sometimes threw around without respect for hard choices. The jury went out with their binders. The courtroom emptied to a low vibration of footsteps and whispers in the hall. We sat very still. I listened to the clock. It did not tick every second. It ticked at the minute. The time between felt held like breath. When the jury returned, the room pulled itself into attention. The foreperson stood with the verdict form. The clerk took it, read it, and handed it back. Her voice was even and official. In the matter of United States versus Whitmore Therapeutics and Leonard Whitmore on the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The air changed shape. On the count of criminal negligence resulting in death, we find the defendant guilty. The judge did not look at anyone. The list went on. Obstruction, falsification of records, witness tampering, guilty, guilty. The other executives fared little better. One count fell for one of them. Most stood. Asher had already pleaded to reduce charges. No one said his name out loud. Leonard did not move. A muscle started in his jaw and stopped. The judge thanked the jury for their service. Sentencing would be set. The gavel sounded like a small, honest piece of wood striking another piece of wood. Nothing grand, just true. Marshall stepped to the defense table. The cuffs were quiet. Leonard looked up. For one fraction of a second, his gaze fixed on Mara as if she were part of a calculation he had misjudged on a whiteboard, and now wanted to correct. It passed. They took him through a side door. The door closed with the soft press of a seal. In the long glass of the courthouse corridor, our faces appeared as a single stretched shape. The seal of the United States sat in gold on the far wall and washed its circle into the floor. Outside clouds moved over the city and dropped small squares of shadow on the bay. The building held the light and the reflection held us until the next set of doors opened and let the day in. The headlines thinned. Trucks took down the last live shot tents across from the courthouse and left damp squares on the grass. Whitmore signs came off a glass tower in Fremont and left clean rectangles the wind could not hold. A press release called it a strategic dissolution. The market called it something shorter. The court called it a victim compensation fund and stamped a schedule with a seal that pressed through 2 sheets of paper. In the kitchen of a new apartment in Oakland, boxes stacked like short walls made a narrow hallway between the sink and the sliding door. The place smelled like paint and cardboard. Mara stood barefoot on the cool wood and cut a strip of packing tape with a butter knife. Ink rose when she opened the top box. Glossy covers tilted inside like scaled fish. A red field, a soft edge where the color bled as if a drop had spread through fabric. Red Flag Handbook, the title said in a quiet font. She slid one copy free. The paper was heavy without being stiff. Tessa walked in carrying a plant that did not know yet where the sun would be best. She set it on the counter and looked at the book in Mara's hands. Cover turned out right, she said. It did, Mara answered. Her voice was low. She ran a thumb along the edge and felt the seal where the laminate caught. She placed the book on the counter and set a small glass block on top of it. The block held a printed image under it. A black fleck in a vial, a dot that had been a sentence in a room. The block pressed the page flat. The reflection in the block was clear. Nora came in with a paper bag. She unpacked bowls and a pan with a copper bottom and the smallest kettle. The last thing out of the bag was a white envelope. She set it on the table. The handwriting on the front was careful and thin, the ink a muted blue. Mara wiped her palms on her jeans and opened it. The paper inside was thick. "Dear Miss Kane," it began, "I have read your paper. I have watched the recordings. I have found my wrist again. A bracelet sits on a dresser. It has not moved in a week. Your words gave shape to air I did not know was air. Thank you, Celeste." Mara held the paper a moment longer than it took to read the words. Then she folded it and slid it back into the envelope. She placed it beside the kettle as if the letter might warm there and loosen whatever glue the past had left along its edges. In San Diego, the convention hotel filled with the smell of brewed coffee and carpet cleaner and the static of 1,000 name tags. The conference hall hummed with projector fans. Nora and Mara stood at the side of the stage and watched a man in a gray suit finish a talk on compliance cultures that sounded like polished stones being moved from a bowl to another bowl. When he finished, people clapped the way they clap for the end of a meeting. The moderator called their names. They walked up the steps. The lights were warmer than the courtroom lights by a few degrees. The hum of the projectors had the pitch of a window unit in a motel. Nora spoke first. She did not pace. She held her hands at her sides and let her sentences land without decorations. Slides appeared behind her. Not names, patterns, praise that arrived in flares, isolation that looked like care, confidentiality dressed as trust. She stepped aside. Mara moved to the microphone. She did not look back at the slides. She looked at the people and found faces and held them for the time it took to say a sentence. "I was told I was perfect for a role I was not trained for," she said. "I was flattered. The flattery had a shape. It moved me to a place on paper." Hands went up. Questions came that did not try to draw blood. A woman in the third row stood and asked what a warning sign felt like. Mara took a breath. "When praise sounds like placement," she said. "When love asks you to sign without reading. When the room gets quieter when you say you want to learn more." The room was still in the way of people who have taken a note and want to write it down right. Afterward, on a patio that looked over water cut by late light, Camille sat with them at a small round table. The metal was warm. Silverware rang lightly in a way that made the evening feel clean. A server set down 3 plates and moved away. Camille wore a jacket that could be mistaken for someone else's until you saw the way it fit across her shoulders. "The judge approved the first round," she said, opening a napkin in her lap. "Disbursements start next week." Mara nodded once. She lifted her glass. It was water with a curl of lemon. The peel's oils glossed the surface. She drank and set it down exactly where the ring would not leave a mark. They ate without filling the empty spaces with talk. A breeze came off the water and brought salt and a smell like iodine. Someone at the next table laughed and then caught themselves and softened it. The sun laid a crease of gold along the metal rail and then slid behind a building. Nora watched the color sink and felt a looseness in her chest, as if a knot had remembered how to open. Back in Oakland, the apartment found its own sounds. Heat ticks in the wall. A neighbor's radio at 11 every night for exactly 2 songs. A refrigerator that hummed like a tired insect and then was quiet. Mara learned the steps between the boxes in the dark so she could move through them without touching her toes to cardboard. She hung her chalkboard near the desk and wrote 3 phrases on it in small letters, where only she could see them. The chalk dust left a white crescent on her fingertips. She set the glass block on her desk beside the keyboard. It was heavier than it looked. When she slid a sheet of paper under it, the edges flattened and the words looked clearer. The black fleck in the image did not move. It did not need to. It was a point in space she could use to measure the distance to where she stood now. On a weekday night, Nora came by with groceries. She unpacked scallions and a can of tomatoes and a bag of rice. The radio from next door hit its first song. A siren moved along the freeway and then faded until it sounded like air moving in a vent. Mara stirred the pot and leaned her hip against the counter and watched steam fold on itself. Tessa walked in late and dropped a set of keys in a bowl with a clean clink. The sound bounced off the glass door and came back true. They ate at the small table and then washed dishes at the sink, hands moving without choreography, and somehow not getting in each other's way. The clock on the stove kept time without noise. Nora dried the last bowl and set it on the rack, and saw the envelope with Celeste's letter resting by the kettle. She touched the corner and then left it where it was. Later, the three of them stood on the small balcony. The city made a soft light under a low sky. A bus hissed and sighed at the stop and then moved on. In the dark window, their reflections were crisp and unwarped. No drone hung in that pane. The glass showed what was in front of it and nothing else. A breeze lifted the edge of the curtain. Inside, the plant on the counter leaned toward whatever light there would be tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.